going to fit into the next 1 hour while you guys are eating lunch. Recent news, upcoming events, big picture stuff, cool new stuff. Mostly that's where we're going to focus today, trying to give you some details on Microsoft Power Apps and some real world experience of stuff that I'm working on right now. Recent news in the area, fun from around the SharePoint ecosystem. Feature pack number 1 for SharePoint 2016 is now available. There's a 2016 December update for SharePoint as well. The SharePoint 2010 mainstream support is now officially dead for 1 year. If you have customers, or if you are the customer that's got SharePoint 2010 on-premise, you have been out of mainstream support for the last year. You probably want to think about doing an upgrade. Office 365 Sandbox Solution compliant extensions are expiring soon. If you were granted an extension of approximately 1 month, that gave you the month of November to try to get everything done so that your Office 365 solutions have no assemblies inside them. If you're still non-compliant, time is running out, so reach out and get help. Feel free to contact us. Other things in the news, SharePoint Power Apps Flow and BI integration continues. Microsoft has more updates on tying these new technologies together to allow power users and even developers to build more and more interesting, more powerful applications. Lastly, it's not really news. It came out months and months ago. Nielsen's top 10 intranets for 2016, 8 of them were developed in SharePoint. For those of us who are SharePoint enthusiasts, that's actually quite the feather in the cap to actually see so many signs of SharePoint being used inside intranet. Another little blurb about recent news is that the SharePoint mobile app that's been made available is continuing to improve. You'll see what it looks like inside a Microsoft phone, inside an iPhone, inside a regular Android phone. It's looking better and better every day. What's the message here? Microsoft is definitely on a rampage to make people rethink about SharePoint and about mobility. I love seeing that. Upcoming events on the radar. We had a couple of things that have already passed in December, the SharePoint Fest and SP TechCon. Some takeaways that I heard about it. It was all about Power Apps at the SharePoint Fest. And at TechCon, people were very pleased. It did not disappoint one bit. So if you're thinking about going to the next SharePoint Fest or the next SP TechCon, which I think is in April in Austin, Texas, you might want to start making your plans for right now. Otherwise, in the months of December, January, February, and March, things are actually rather quiet, even across the area. It's not until April we start to see things gear up. One thing I want you guys to pay attention to is that we will be willing to host a December 28th virtual user group session if there's enough interest. Watch your control panels during today's virtual session. There's going to be a poll that's going to be sent out to see what your level of interest is. It's going to be exclusively on one topic, Microsoft Flow, and about diving in and really understanding what it is, how it can be used. We're going to see some dovetailing of Flow into our Power App stuff today, but it deserves its own full hour-long session. Big picture stuff that we always try to include for new and for existing members. SharePoint's purpose is it's among the anchor technologies. It shouldn't be thought about as gaining adoption. It should be more about specifying usage. If you're a decision maker inside your organization, you need to equate SharePoint with any other technology, from Exchange to Office to Outlook to using file servers to using a particular browser. It's something that you specify and you make people start to use. Once they get it, they actually start adopting it, and then it becomes the ideal tool for group productivity. We've seen that slide the last couple of sessions, so I'm not going to dwell on it a lot. Another big picture item that I want to talk about is understanding SharePoint's capability. It's an empowering technology. It empowers collaboration. And if there's 4 major stages shown in the colored steps here in collaboration maturity, going from communicating to sharing to tasking to tracking, SharePoint steps in around step 2 and actually makes it possible for you for the first time to really start understanding and delivering on your collaboration productivity, on your maturity. So you need to understand that that's SharePoint's purpose. Is it an app development environment? Yes, but it's really about trying to take steps to collaborate or empower your collaboration, in particular with sharing, with tasking, with tracking. So keep that in mind when you're continuing to interact with your SharePoint environment. Cool new stuff that we're going to be talking about shortly, SharePoint Power Apps and Flow and BI Power BI real life dev, complete with scars and lessons learned so far. The last week or so, I've been asked to actually put together a POC for a customer. We're going to dive into that, but I want to give you a little bit of context first. I think it's necessary. Is a mobile app a mobile app a mobile app? Are they all the same? Is there really any difference? The answer, I think, is yes, there is a big difference. We need to start understanding that there's two major kinds of mobile apps. There's internal mobile apps and there's external mobile apps. On the external side, there's typically very few of them. They're typically customer focused. They want revenue generating, but that's oftentimes very rare. More commonly, you're going to end up with an external mobile app that simply is customer serving. It's providing some additional enhanced service that makes that customer want to do business with you. The ROI metrics related to these applications are also centered around revenue generating. The customers, typically, sometimes fickle, get to control the usage and adoption. We don't get to control that if we're developing these applications. We get to hope what's going on, that the customer likes it. Ultimately, the customer is in control then of the ROI on these applications. On the flip side, there is a whole bevy of potential applications we'll call internal mobile apps. They're typically few, but there could be lots. There's a conventional cost of development that typically exceeds the ROI, which is why they never make the cut. They never get made because they don't necessarily generate any revenue at all. Instead, the focus in your organization is on producing revenue-generating applications. Oftentimes in the world of internal mobile apps, there's potentially large, diverse, loyal internal user bases. There's a potential to realize large cost savings. The ROI metrics related to these apps are on cost savings. The company ultimately gets to control the adoption. They get to specify it, which means the company is actually in control of the ROI that's associated with all of these potential internal applications. Remember, it's not always about revenue generation, it's about profit. And if profit is equal to revenue minus costs, then if you can increase revenue, great. But when things get tough and you start looking at decreasing the cost in an organization, if you start considering better, faster, cheaper as a way that you can increase your profits that particular quarter, that particular year, then this is the opportunity that we're focusing on with SharePoint, with Flow, and with Power Apps. The ability to create very affordably, very quickly, applications that allow you to do your job better, faster, and cheaper. A little bit more context. There's a lot of potential value in developing these internal mobile apps. If we look at all of the different applications that are actually potentially available in your organization, we end up with a few gold level apps, a large number of what I've termed silver level mobile apps, and an equally large bronze level of mobile apps. External or gold apps are few in number. They require gold level costs. The external user population is not necessarily something you get to control. It requires gold level development effort and cost, a gold level time frame, and the ROI resulting is therefore challenging to achieve. Does that mean you don't do it? Absolutely not. It means you do it, but there's costs involved and there's decisions that you have to make, and you're not always sure that you're making the right decisions on which apps you want to develop. Internally, though, we have the ability to, there's a whole group of mobile apps that interact with data, your basic add, change, deletes. They typically possess modest intelligence, some event handling, some reporting, things like that. There's potentially myriad applications if you could find a way to do them affordably. Typically, they miss the cut, though. The user population is large and varied. It would be great if you could find a way to develop these affordably and develop them quickly. In fact, they'd be equally valuable if you could even achieve only 80% of the original vision in the function. Given all of the above, the ROI is actually easy and swift to achieve on these, provided one thing. If we look at internal bronze level apps, this is an entire population of apps that typically interact only with data and don't have any other functionality at all, and yet they potentially a great deal of value. They are limited to point user populations, but the ROI is achievable, even though it's not always compelling. Ultimately, for internal mobile apps, you end up with a small individual savings multiplied by lots of internal users, multiplied by lots of internal apps means tons of savings, a huge return on investment. The secret to all of this, guys, is that we need to find a way to develop those internal applications cheap and fast. That's the secret. That's the vision that I think Microsoft has actually painted with the advent of Power Apps. The Microsoft gives us kind of an American Idol sort of approach to mobile app development. In reality, no one can perfectly know in advance which mobile app is actually going to be a hit or a dud. You just can't know it. So you have to adopt some kind of a mechanism where you bring as many applications in front of your users as you can possibly manage affordably and quickly, and you let the users act as the judges to decide which applications really deserve to be invested in. And the way that I've tried to illustrate that in this diagram is to show that the power users represent your talent. By giving them Power Apps with Microsoft Flow, Power BI, you basically created a factory that allows them to begin to generate tons and tons of Power Apps. That these Power Apps are then provided in a directory to your users. Your users then get to evaluate and judge them, even in an agile sort of look. They get to start steering where these things go. The Power Apps, the Flow, and the Power BI tools allow the Power users to develop these version 1.0 prototypes, these applications, and put them into production, letting people use them until ultimately the cream rises to the top. The really effective applications make themselves known. And that sets the stage for your developers to potentially come in and either augment or enhance those applications still further using Power Apps, or you can create what are called custom APIs. Ultimately, they may choose to actually rebuild those mobile applications using the tools that are available only to the professional developers. But the point here, guys, is this. By creating this mechanism for generating lots of ideas and bringing them up to some prototype level, you're setting the stage where the users are empowered to go and try these applications out and vet them out so that you actually know which ones you ought to be investing in to get even more return on your investment. So you ended up with a mechanism here that Power Apps empowers the evolution, so to speak, of governing mobile app survival. It turns out to be prolifically reproduce lots of mobile apps with constant changes and mutations tested by the survival of the fittest. We've literally introduced evolution into mobile app development by making the creation of those applications affordable. Any questions so far? Any topics as we jump in? Are people following? Am I moving too quick? I'm not seeing any questions showing up, so I'll proceed. Microsoft Flow is the next thing we want to talk about because we're going to join these two things together in the demo that I'm going to show you guys in a moment. Microsoft Flow is only a part. SharePoint is only a part of the scope of Microsoft Flow. Think of Microsoft Flow as being an event handler. When something happens, do this. And it can happen in a lot of different areas. Think numerous small, simplistic operations. Think not limited to SharePoint. In fact, Microsoft Flow is currently, I checked this morning, it's connected to over 75 non-Microsoft systems, and it's increasing every day. We're talking Dropbox, Salesforce, Box.com, Twitter, you name it, 75 different ones. Ultimately, what it makes you think of is minions. What you're creating in these little things called flows are little minions, or the equivalent of interns or summer students, things that do little teeny tasks for you so that you don't have to bother yourself with it. In the big picture, what you're really looking at with Flow is that you're revisioning what a business solution is. It really is potentially a set of distributed agents all performing little itty-bitty tasks that solve a larger overall business problem. Instead of creating a single do-it-all application that only solves one particular problem and has lots of complexity, we end up with a lot of little agents that, when they work together, solve a business problem, but solve it and is developed by the power users themselves, not necessarily the developers. And that's a brand new paradigm that we're stepping into. Here's a little bit about Microsoft Flow, showing kind of an infographic that in Office 365, on the app launcher of Office 365, you can now see that Flow, along with Power BI, along with Power Apps, are tiles that are going to be available to everybody. When you click on Flow, you're treated to an introductory screen that basically asks you what kind of problem do you want to solve. From there, you get to actually get a series of templates where instead of building a flow, a workflow from scratch, deciding what the events are, etc., you can actually choose from what was no less than 432 separate templates that were available as of this morning. Once you choose a template, you actually end up filling out something that looks a lot like a SharePoint Designer workflow. You fill in boxes in what is a very intuitive process. Ultimately, you end up generating a workflow that you can then trigger from a variety of ways. It's monitoring SharePoint, or it's monitoring Twitter, or it's monitoring Salesforce, and you can keep track of all of the flows that you've created and what their current status is. We're going to look a little bit more deeply into that as I show you the demo that's coming up. All right, jumping right into Power Apps. I was asked about a week ago to build a POC for a client. Their challenge was to replace a SQL-based custom application that was not cost-effective to deploy. What do I mean by that? It meant that they built a very rudimentary data schema, and the application itself has your standard add, change, and delete, your CRUD operations, and a little bit of reporting that, in fact, was actually done in Power BI Desktop. But to deploy the solution out of development and into production meant they suddenly had to start paying for that SQL environment, either paying $5,000 up front for the SQL license on their own standalone VM, or they have to get into some kind of shared environment where they're paying at least somewhere between $80 and $100 per month just for the SQL environment, all to serve a database that might have only 10 columns in it and maybe only a couple of hundred records at the end of the year. That's a pretty big price tag for a pretty small problem. Enter SharePoint to try to solve that problem. What we're going to do is minimize this, go into Microsoft Power Apps, and show you what I've been working on. For some reason, this has got a little quiet. I think I actually, when you leave Power Apps idle for too long, it starts to sit still. I'm going to have to restart it. Here's the first tip that I've actually learned in working with Power Apps the last 2 weeks, I suppose. There's a Power Apps web studio that lives inside your browser, and there's a Power Apps desktop studio that you can download and run right from your desktop, right from your laptop. It's actually preferable to use the Power Apps studio, the one that lives on your desktop. I think it ends up being able to, it's a bit more stable. It doesn't require constant logging in. You don't accidentally lose your work because you didn't save after a couple of minutes. This is what the Power Apps user interface looks like when you're in the portal. The particular one that we're going to work on right here is the Corporate Tracker version 3. This customer had a series of programs that they wanted to try to track. Corporate level programs like initiatives, like a portfolio, a program of projects, that sort of thing. And while that's loading, I'm looking to see if I have any questions from anybody. We've got a number of attendees. This is looking quite good. I'm on a Wi-Fi connection, so it might take a little bit of time to get things ready and to download this application. But this is pretty typical. Even when I'm in the office on an Ethernet, I notice that it takes a couple of seconds to prepare a studio for a Power Apps application. While that's loading, I'm going to jump into a browser and show you what we're working on. This particular customer had 2 different lists, the programs list in SharePoint, and this is what we decided. We're going to try exploring using SharePoint lists as virtual SQL tables, where there's a one-to-many relationship between any one program in the programs list and the costs that are captured on a monthly basis in the EIP monthly cost list. So the goal is to build an application that allows me to add, change, and delete records in programs, add, change, and delete records inside the monthly costs, later join these 2 together so that I can do some kind of a reporting. That element, that component is going to come from Power BI Desktop. The add, changing, and deleting, along with some rudimentary graphing and charting, is going to be available inside the Power Apps. If I look at any one individual program, we see that we're capturing about 10 columns worth of data. If we look inside the monthly costs, we see that for any given program, I'm capturing costs for the last 5 months, 2016, December, November, October, September. Let's go see if this is open. Yeah, looks like it is. What I've done inside Power Apps is build one base screen, one base application that tied into the programs list, and then I wanted to add in a few additional screens. There tends to be a list view that shows you all of the different items in a given table. Then there's going to be a viewing screen. Then there's going to be an edit screen. And what you get inside Power Apps, let this refresh, what you get inside Power Apps is the ability to add either a gallery control object, or you can add to a given screen a display or an edit control. And those are really the main features that we saw even in our previous session, where I demonstrated adding and creating these screens, adding the forms to the screen, binding that form to a particular data source that represents your list, and then further configuring it so that I'm only exposing and interacting with those particular fields that I wanted to interact with. At the top, what I ended up doing is realizing I had so many screens that it was time to create some kind of a main screen that has nothing but buttons on it, and when you were to look at what the buttons do, it just navigates to a particular screen, whether it's view programs, adding an EIP program, viewing the monthly costs, adding a given monthly cost, and then there's actually a view reports and a couple of experimental ones that I'll show you later on. The view program functionality you'd already seen in a previous virtual user session. The add EIP program also was the same thing. The only thing that was different was adding this entry into the other table. And if we take a look at what I did there, here's a view program screen, here's my view cost screen, and at the right-hand side we have this panel that allows us, similar to Visual Studio, to manage all of the different objects that sit on this one screen. What I found really works well is to go to the Advanced tab and drop down a list of all of the controls that are actually on that screen. That makes it very easy to select, say, the background that's behind the title bar, or if I click on the options panel here, if I go back to the screen itself and the gallery, I see that the gallery control has now been selected, and where I get to bind to it is right here under items, that the data is coming from the list called EIP monthly costs. And I'd already added that. We'd seen that in the last session. I had added EIP monthly costs as a data source to my overall project. In fact, I'd added EIP programs, my images, a couple of other things that EIP monthly costs, along with month, title, and year, were the fields that I exposed. We saw that in the previous session. We made an add and an edit form that went along with this. Some of the things that I've learned along the way is that there are times when you actually want to cast a particular piece of data and govern the control of it. What I found is that there's a formatting formula or a formatting function called text that can let you grab the value that's coming in and then format it any way that you want. In this case, I added a $sign in front along with rounding off to 0 decimal places. So there's a formula that you can actually use to give you a great deal of control over the incoming data. To not put it in is going to mean that you're going to carry maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 decimal places. You're not going to have a prefix on that shows you the $signs, things like that. What were some other things that I got that I ended up being surprised on? I found out that when you are doing a save inside the function area here, it's actually possible to put this very handy little semicolon in so that you're performing multiple operations stacked up one right after the other. In this case, when I hit the checkbox on this add page, it's going to submit the form, then it's going to navigate back to the browse feature or back to the browse screen, and it's going to use an uncover transition. That turned out to be really, really handy when what you're trying to do is click and then perform some additional tasks. And the semicolon in between is what gives you the ability, hey, you're literally writing code at this point. It gives you the ability to perform some additional interaction. We've seen the view screens, we've seen the edit screens. The last thing that we didn't get a chance to see last week was how can we actually wire up some reports? What PowerApps has out of the box is the ability to actually create a couple of simplistic charts here, a column chart, a line chart, and a pie chart. It's getting more sophisticated. They're trying to work so that Power BI, not just alerts, but actual Power BI visualizations, interactive visualizations, are going to be available inside your PowerApps. That's what I'm working towards next. It's not ready yet, but at least they're working on it because there's such a demand for it. If you click on any one of the objects that are on the page here that represents a chart that I've added, I'm looking to see if we've got any questions. Nope, so far so good. You'll see that when you hit this one particular, it's the entire chart, but there's actually pieces that go up and make the chart itself that you can go and click on. I can either click directly in here, and now I'm talking about the actual chart itself, and here is the label line. So that's the items are coming from the list called EIP programs. What goes along the horizontal axis is called the labels. That's the budget year in this case. So 2016 is what's being picked up here. The series then, oops, lost my focus. The series is going to be what's shown on the vertical axis. And you can actually stack up a number of different series, one right after the other. In this case, I only chose total budget. I didn't want to really clutter it all up, although I think I also have series number 2. There's a planned monthly budget that's listed right next to them. So those are the only things that you had to do to actually wire this up. And what's cool about it is that this chart is actually live. If we go and take this whole thing for a test ride, I'll start up at the top so that when I go up to the play button and actually play this, if I go and click on View Programs, I'm going to see a list of all of the different programs. It's scrollable. If I add an EIP program, you'll see a blank page that lets me go and add a brand new program in here and put a value in. Suppose I'll test it out. I'll say program, I think 06 is the next one in order. Program description, this is a program for CSPUG. The region, America. Later on, I would add these as drop-down lists. You've seen that that's possible in, later on the page here. Category, in a proof of concept, you try to limit the number of things that you have to do there. I put one drop-down in just to prove that I could go get it. And that's actually picking up status from a choice file, or from a choice column. The budget years, 2016. Planned start date, I can actually put values in. I'll say 12/1/2016, or I could hit the calendar control. This is just a little bit quicker for right now. 1/31/2017. It'll actually calculate the planned months for me. That's a calculated column. The total budget we're going to put in here is $60,000. I've filled in every single thing that I want to here. We are going to end up with a program 6 value inside our programs table. And if I scroll back down here, we'll see that we have a program 6. More importantly, if I go back to my ERP tracker and I go into this programs list and I do a refresh, we'll see that our little mobile app, got to log in really quick, sorry everybody. So it happens when you run in incognito mode. If we look at EIP programs, we see there is a program 6. So this application is actually feeding this live into SharePoint. The next thing I would want to do with that application, which is still running, I'll go back to the main display, and we're going to go and add a monthly cost. It may as well be for that one. 2016, the month is going to be for December. The EIP program name, this is a live population, so it's going to get all the latest ones, and there's program 6 available. The program ID is EIP 06. The monthly budget, I haven't finished wiring up. It's going to be $10,000, and the monthly actual was going to be that it was $8,500. I've just done my report for actually putting in where I'm at on this particular project. If I hit that checkbox sign, it's going to go and add that into the month table, and now we end up being able to see all of the different costs. And sure enough, at the bottom we see EIP 20,000 or 2016 for December. More importantly, if I go to view reports, I'm going to see that for 2016, I ended up with a $60,000 budget for that particular application or that particular program. So it is showing up here. We're picking it all up live inside there. Some of the other things that I was also experimenting with that I wanted to share with you guys was the ability for this, let me close this application and show you. When I started adding media the other day, I noticed that there was actually a camera control. And I looked and said, that can't be real. You can't actually make an application this rudimentary that can access the camera that's inside the phone. Well, the truth is, it actually really does work. If I click on picture here, it navigates into the picture screen. The picture screen that I started building adds a control on to, now you're seeing, hi everybody, it actually adds a live camera control on that. If I click on it, we can see that on the on select button, it actually is going to collect. It's going to add that image, the camera.photo image, as a single picture to a collection called My Images that gets stored right up inside this space. That up here is actually where that My Images collection exists. Let's go see what that looks like, because I know everybody's going to be keen to try that. I'm starting to run the application. You're seeing the application running live. I'm going to put up the number 1 in front of my webcam, and we're going to snap. And now we see that we've added 1. Let's add a 2. Let's add a 3. And now if I go up here, I'll see that this is all scrollable. So all of this is actually capturable inside this application. And if I close this application, it's actually going to remember it. That's pretty cool. That actually activated the camera on my laptop. And if I run this application in my Android phone, I have a Galaxy S7, it's going to ask for permission to run that camera on that Galaxy S7. If you run this application on an iPhone, it's going to ask you for permission to access the camera on your iPhone. If you run it on a Windows app, it's going to ask you for permission. And if you give it, it's going to know how to control that camera. And suddenly, that makes everybody on the call start thinking, wow, if I could create applications that could go running around and activate my camera, what kind of applications would I be doing? I'm thinking issue management. I'm thinking changing of various spaces. I'm thinking going on client sites and asking them if you can go and add a bunch of screenshots onto a record that represents a site visit. The list just goes on and on and on. If you're in the client that we're working on, in fact, is in they build packaging information, packaging materials, bands and straps and shrink wrap and stuff like this. When they have, if you were to give an application like this to a customer, then they would be able to actually take it with their phone and go if they ever have a problem. They could say, oh, we had something damaged in shipping. Here's what it looks like. Click, click, click. Add it into an issue. The issue goes into the list, and the list gets processed as part of your workflow for handling various kinds of issues. It makes you start going crazy with all the ideas that are possible. In addition to the camera, you can also actually go and add barcodes, a barcode scanner. You can take live video. You can capture audio like a recorded interview or anything like that. And there's even mapping capabilities, so it can tap into the GPS of your phone. And I'm going to be demoing that later on. So we got some pretty good functionality inside this application. We have tied into, let me restart the application really quick again and go back. We've tied into 2 different lists that are tied together. We have some rudimentary reporting that's going on. There's some additional Power BI reporting. This is just another report that was done where I could actually break this out by with filters that I could say for the month of November, or I can type in and say for December. Here's what it all looked like, and you can see right away that we had a variance on program number is 01, so we got to go beat those guys up. Everybody else seems like they're doing okay. If we look at September, we see that there was a wild variance on program 02. So as the program manager, you want to jump in there. Very useful interactive reporting that's capable even with the rudimentary charting functionality that's available inside Power Apps right now, and it's getting better every day. That's pretty exciting for me because it lets you give data to all of your end users, not necessarily a static snapshot where they come back and they ask you, well, can you give me a report on this? Can you give me a report on that? You actually give them the live capabilities, and they can go and slice and dice it any way that they want. That's the exciting part about what's available here. We've seen that we can actually add pictures in, and that we can store these pictures. They become part of a permanent record. The same thing goes with adding pictures that already exist on your desktop, even adding attachments like files from your phone into a list item are possible as well. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is, or the next two things is, how do you tie all of this into Power BI, at least for now, to do some kind of reporting? If I open up Power BI Desktop and create a project in this particular workspace, what I actually did was create two connections that go into SharePoint lists, and go directly into monthly costs and go into programs. By simply adding them onto the space here, by going and saying get data, from more, you actually get a dialog box that lets you choose a SharePoint folder. So it's literally going to add a SharePoint list into your workspace with Power BI. By adding these two lists that have a one-to-many relationship implicit in them, where they're keyed on, in fact, I'll show it to you guys, the two data sources that are available. In Power BI Desktop, you have the visualization tier or layer of Power BI. You have the data tier, and then you have the data relationships tier. This is where you actually build the model itself. I have EIP programs, I have EIP monthly costs. It actually tries to find two ties here that make a key between these two fields. In this case, I told it that in the EIP program table, the value that's stored under project program ID is actually the same as the value called title in EIP monthly costs. That created the join that when I go inside visualizations, I can start creating a table up here. The table gets built, I start dragging and dropping a few items into this table, and I have literally created a join on the fly without actually having to explicitly do it inside SQL. What's cooler is that once I created this table of information, I can then create slicers that go and pick up on the program ID and slicers that go and pick up on the month simply by dragging the slicer tool over onto the workspace here. Sorry, this one's called the slicer tool. And you tell it which field you want to use as a slicer. Then when I created two different visualizations, one that goes by month, one that goes by program, it's right now doing an aggregation of all of this content. And this visualization is supposed to be viewable inside my Power Apps. I haven't finished wiring it up, but that's what's coming up next, is to be able to show these interactively. What's cool is that inside Power BI Desktop, I can actually use my slicers then to show that for the month of September, here's what all of the different programs look like. That in September, EIP 01, Program 1 was doing fine, Program 3 and 4 were doing fine, but EIP was doing horribly. In October, everybody was doing badly and deserves a beating. In November, things got better fast. In December, we actually started seeing all of these. We don't see anything from number 6 yet. Program number 6 that we added. What we need to do is go over here and actually do a refresh of the data. I'm looking at the time really quick and seeing 12:12. We've got about 15 minutes left. Still got to talk a little bit about flow. Once you do a refresh on EIP programs, then what we should see is that, where's EIP 06? Oh, turn this off, turn this off. Here's our EIP 06 starting to show up automatically. So you can see this workspace as being a very live, very dynamic environment in which you can build visualizations that later are going to be exportable and embeddable inside your Power Apps applications. I'm going to save that for the next session. Suffice to say, it's kind of cool to be able to do this kind of live reporting instead of this live data mining instead of just static reporting, and it's kind of exciting for me. The last thing that I wanted to show you guys in Power Apps was that I created an additional flow, an event handler, that whenever somebody adds a new monthly cost on to the monthly cost table, I'm going to end up getting an email message that tells me right away. So if I'm the program manager, I'm going to know instantly that something is actually coming up. Let's take a look and see how that's done inside Microsoft Flow. And I have to sign in again really quick. Because you're going to see an email message being sent. Okay, we actually did get a monthly cost. You're going to get to see this email message sent in early. This is for EIP 06 for 2016. For December, the budget was $10,000. The actual is 85. So I got an email message sent. How did that happen? It happened by creating a flow as part of my distributed business solution. Let's go see what that looked like. In the flow, in Microsoft Flow's portal, this is what it actually looks like. When you first start and launch it, you can get to it from your app launcher in Office 365. It wants you to immediately start seeing all the different things that are available, or you can just go to the flows that you've already created. In this case, I created a new flow by, I guess I can try doing this really quick. I'll go to templates and say what I want to do is send a customized email message when a new SharePoint list item is added. I clicked on that tile. It gives me a description, more detailed description of what this looks like so that I can decide really, is this what I want to do? When I click on use this template, it says, well, you're going to need some information, and then it tells you whether or not you've already supplied it with that information. I'm going to need access into Office 365. I'm going to need an account to log into for Outlook, and I'm going to need an account to get into SharePoint specifically. If I hit continue, then it literally steps you through the process of going and accessing a particular site, a particular list. It already goes and gets with your credentials, your profile in Active Directory, and then it lets you actually compose what that email is going to look like and all of the different things that need to be added into it. If I close this and not save it, I'll show you what I did already. Here's my particular flow, and if I open it up, I said I want to get into the EIP tracker website. I want to get into the monthly cost list so that whenever a new item is created in monthly cost, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get my profile because I'm going to need that information, and I'm going to send an email to myself. The email, when you click here, it gives you a list of all of the variables that you have access to. So basically, you can put in a very sophisticated note. In the subject, I said new corporate program, monthly cost added. I pass in, and I literally compose this email that says, hi, Mark, the new item was created here by this person, and here's some details. The program ID, I snatched from all of the details that are available about that new item. It's created, date created by department. For those of you that have built lots and lots of SharePoint Designer workflows, this is going to look fairly familiar, that you have this level of control. Well, you get to do it from inside a web browser. You get to do it in something that's not SharePoint Designer. Under advanced options, you have even more control, that you can kind of spoof who it's from. You can say it's coming from someone else. You can send it to additional people as well. So if you want to send it off to a manager, et cetera, it's all available. The idea here is that you're giving people information through their email if that's their preferred mechanism for communicating, for collaborating. And when you're done, you can actually click update the flow or close. I didn't make any updates, so I'm just going to hit close. What it does then is tells me that it's going to be watching, that the flow service is going to be watching to see if something changes, adds a new item into that particular list. Let's go test it using Power Apps. I'm going to go and add a new monthly cost because I've got Power Apps actually still running here. And now here I'm going to run and do 2016. The month in this case is going to be November because I haven't done that for Program 6 yet. I'm going to choose Program 6, type this in. The monthly budget, I think I said, was $10,000. We started off and actually went 12,000 for that particular month. We went a little over on program 6 when we were getting started. When I hit save, this Power Apps application has just added a brand new item into that tracker list. Let's go see what it, to confirm that that's actually happened. If I go into EIP monthly cost list and I do a refresh, then under November, we'll see that I have a program number 6. And here's the $10,000, $12,000, and a $2,000 variance that I just entered. Now let's go and see if I actually got my email. I think I had an alert. New apps not listed under there. We'll go check my email really quick. It might not have arrived yet. We're going to wait for it. It's going to pop up. You can see that all through the morning as I was testing, I've been getting all of these different reports. So the functionality does work. It does pop up and actually show you everything that's going on. There seems to be a little bit of a lag, like maybe 5 minutes before you're actually going to see it. The last one came at 12:05. So what we've seen here in this application is a real-life demo that took us, let's jump back into the presentation for a moment, that took us from a potentially very expensive but simplistic SQL-based application for tracking programs and tracking costs with some Power BI desktop-based reporting, and we managed to replicate it in a very cost-effective manner as a mobile application using SharePoint lists. And that mobile application can, at the touch of a button, actually be recast, if we wanted to, as in landscape mode for a larger tablet if you wanted to. The choice is yours. In so doing, we've literally created an application that becomes responsive by design, becomes mobile by design, gives all of the functionality that the customer originally was looking for, but now they don't have to worry about the additional cost burden of developing the app using, say, Visual Studio or SQL Management Studio or some other tool like that, porting it over to, in C# and .NET into some kind of a hosted environment like IIS to live, trying to make that as a responsive design, and then still dovetailing all the Power BI stuff in. Instead, we got everything all for free because we're already paying our Office 365 subscription, and we get all of this functionality. Let me see if there's any other features that I wanted to show you guys. I think I've covered all of it in today's session. Any questions, any comments, any suggestions? I think I finally see a question here. I'm going to open it up. Give me a second. I have too many panels in my toolbar. There we go. I learned a ton during the last webinar. Mark created Power App for client, flipped out. Fantastic, Jeff. Kaboom, this is my head exploding from all the information and ideas. Jeff, I like where you're headed with this. In fact, that's the perfect segue. Next session, December 28th, if you guys want us to, we need more people answering the polls, please. I want to dive into 5 truly useful things you can do with Flow, and more importantly, I want to share other group things that you guys are developing. Is there any interest in that? This is a users group session. It's not really meant to be a webinar. And I love coming up with ideas, and I love presenting to all of you guys, but I want it to be more interactive. There is virtue, there is synergy to be derived from all of us sharing our experiences and sharing the things that we're working on, even sharing the challenges that we're facing so that we can try to overcome them together. That's the purpose of a user group session. It's not always one way, it's interactive. So if there's other things, Jeff, if there's a way that you can do a save as of your application, save it and scrub it so that it's not specific to a particular client, and bring it back and show it to us either on the 28th of December or on the first thing in January. Would there be any interest in that? Let me know. That would be fantastic. Otherwise, we've hit the 12:23 mark. Sadly, there's not really time to do a BYOP. It's really probably better that I just say it's been a lot of fun for MTech to host this users group since September. We've learned a lot. We've seen the resonance. I think we have 20+ people attending today. The resonance with going virtual. There are some challenges to the bandwidth limitations of getting people to talk to us while we go virtual, but we're working on it, and I wish you guys a very Merry Christmas. Elizabeth, can you take everybody off of mute and see if people can actually talk and we can share? Hi, everybody. Merry Christmas. Because I can already hear that we're getting so much feedback that going on audio is going to take some practice before we perfect it. But from Dan, from Greg, from Jeff, from Tim, from anybody else that attended today, those are just the first names that I saw. Any other comments? Any other questions? I'm not picking up anything from anybody right now, even though you're unmuted, guys. It sounds like Greg's open to doing a Power App demo or a presentation. So we got Greg. I bet we got Jeff as well. You guys will simply be made presenters when we go into the 28th or we go into the January session. Expect that you'll have to do a little bit of typing in case. How many of us have Skype for Business? Jeff, I think the majority of us, we might try using that next time. I'm very, very open to that idea. But I also want you guys to bring next time are problems that you're facing with Flow, problems that you're facing with Power Apps. To say that it has idiosyncrasies is an understatement. There are things that just drove me bonkers, like having to know what these formulas are when you click on something, to have to know on select what this formula needs to be to go and add something up here to collect my images, trying to find that documentation out. Driving me crazy, but it's getting better every day, and that's the exciting part. And then you stumble on the ability to actually, to even get your camera inside there. Be thinking about what else we could be doing with cameras, with GIS, or rather GPS. Give me some ideas, the problems that you guys would like to see us try to solve, and let's see what we can do. I run out of gas, guys. You've been a fantastic audience. I wish you guys a Merry Christmas. Hopefully we'll see you before the New Year. If not, a very Happy New Year to everybody. And I look forward to seeing this virtual user group session increase in growth and scope and participation as we go into 2017. Thanks, everybody.